Yeah, we're live. I'm swimming. 8:53 in the morning. Hopefully you guys are all doing well. The thing that I look forward to more than anything is after doing a video, first of all, completing the video and posting the video, getting it done. That's awesome. But I like after a few hours have gone by and that I could go in and read the comments because I like interacting with people. That's why I do these live feeds. I like interacting with people. I like hopefully help them by answering questions and getting them, along the way on projects, even just sitting around and doing the question and answer thing, talking with people and being car guys. That's part of the deal. It's like getting to go hang out with all your buddies at PRI or SEMA show or a car show or Cars and Coffee or wherever you go, your local watering hole, wherever you go, just getting to hang around, talk about car stuff. That's awesome. And so that interaction is good. And it also, for me, gives me, because this is what I do for a living, so it also gives me lots of information, because coming up with things, topics of discussion for live feeds and stuff, there's a lot of information out there. But after doing several thousand, you have to get new things, and I get new ideas from all these comments. So today I actually wanted to talk about push rods, even though I've been getting lots of comments about, more of these LSA people, more of these tight LSA people. But on the pushrod side, I got an interesting question. So the question was, I'm going to mill the heads. Do I need to change the pushrod length? And how does that affect pushrod length? And I have this pushrod and I'm going to mill the head this much. And how much do I need to change the pushrod length? So that's an interesting thing, not specifically for that question, because that's almost a one-to-one, depending on the angle of the pushrod. But the thing is, let's talk a little bit about when you need to adjust push rods, and we'll look at the LS specifically, but a lot of this carries over to other engine families. So if you have a pushrod engine, obviously the pushrod length in the LS engine is critical, because and this is different than some other small block Chevy, small block Ford, big block Chevy, big block Ford, where the rocker doesn't bolt down as a positive stop on the pedestal. Because then, because of that particular design on the cylinder head and the rocker and their interaction, because of that, the pushrod length determines how much preload the lifter has. So, if you've ever done an old small block Chevy or small block Ford or big block or whatever, and when you're doing a hydraulic camshaft, either a hydraulic roller or a hydraulic flat tappet, if you're doing a solid, you put lash in it. You use a feeler gauge, put it on the heel of the cam, use a feeler gauge, put a little bit of lash in it, and then that's how you adjust it. When you're doing hydraulic roller stuff, what you do is put a certain amount of preload in it. Back in the old days, you do a half a turn. So you would, like on the small block Chevys, a lot of times back in the day, I remember my first car, my Camaro, my split bumper 70.5 Rally Sport. Don't get excited. It had a base 2-barrel engine in it to begin with. So it was not, it was not too fast. But I remember doing the valve adjust with the valve cover off, and it's squirting oil all over, and you use the little clips that redirect the oil onto the rocker. But what you do is you would, idle up the motor a little bit, and then you just back the rocker off until it started clacking. Okay, that means it was loose. And then you tighten it slowly till it didn't clack anymore. That was zero lash. And then you'd go another half a turn. And on those, they had the little pinch nuts, so it would just hold itself in place after that, which they had a tendency to loosen up, especially if you had reused that pinch nut a bunch of times. So you put like a half a turn of preload in it, and then that was the right amount. You could run a little more, you could run a little less, but that was basically the right amount. On the LS, we do a similar thing. But how we do that is a little bit different. What we do is you tighten the rocker all the way down, and then the length of the push rod determines how much it pushes that lifter down, how much it preloads the lifter. So and here are the extremes. If the push rod is too short, basically when you tighten the rocker down, you can move the rocker because it's not in contact with the push rod when the push rod is in contact with the lifter. So there's no preload, there's lash. And so that's bad if the push rod is too short. If the push rod is too long, when you're tightening the rocker down, it keeps compressing and compressing and compressing the lifter. And if it compresses it too much, what happens is when you start the motor up and you have oil pressure in the lifter will push will push back up on the rocker, and with nowhere else to go, what that does is it opens the valve. And if it opens the valve while the motor is trying to turn over, you let all the compression escape and the motor doesn't run. So you can hang the valve open if you have too long of a push rod. So too short, you have lash. Too long, and the motor doesn't run because it hangs the valve open. If you hang it open too far, obviously you can have piston to valve interference, but that has to be a lot for you to damage it. People don't usually miss by that much. But in between those two, we have a pretty big range of adjustment. So I did a push rod test where we changed the push rod length. I want to say it was 100 or 150 thousandths. So we went essentially from, let's say, a 7,350 to a 7,500 push rod. So that's kind of in the range. A factory push rod length is about 740, like 7.4 inches, roughly. It's a little bit less than that, and guys are going to chime in about, oh, no, it's 7.8 or 389 or whatever the number is. Okay, so we just call that a 7,400 push rod. And then where you're measuring it is different. Is it from the tip to the tip? Is it from where it rests on the cup and all? You know, guys can get into all of that. We call it a 7,400 push rod. So now, what things would you change that might necessitate a change in push rod length? Well, first of all, one of the things guys question about is a camshaft. So the camshaft, like the lift and duration, don't have anything to do with that, other than when they have a specific lift and duration in a camshaft, it usually dictates a change in the base circle of the camshaft. So what you've done, even though the lift has gotten bigger, you've shrunk the camshaft down to make that happen. So when you do that, when the cam is on the heel of the cam, which is when you adjust the push rod, or when you adjust the rockers, and the thing that dictates push rod length is going to change. It doesn't always. Sometimes it doesn't change that much. So it would depend on, and this is the important part of this whole discussion. So the amount that you would need to change the push rod is going to be dictated by the change that you're making, but also by where you start. So for instance, if we have, let's say we have our situation where we have only a half a turn of preload, okay? So then we mill the head. Let's say we mill the head 30 thousandths, which would be a normal amount for an LS. Anything more, and you start running into issues with the bolt holes on the intake fitting and stuff. And so about 30 seems to be a good number for guys that are doing that. You mill the head 30 thousandths. So what happens? Now we have more preload, but you didn't really have very much to begin with. And you were still well within the range of a turn and a half. So if you mill it 30, you would effectively need to change the push rod length by 30 thousandths. Let's say it was 1-to-1. It's not exactly that, but let's say it was 1-to-1. So you need to change the push rod length. You need to make the push rod 30 thousandths shorter to have that be the same, to have the same half-inch preload turn, or half a turn preload. But you don't really need to do that, because if you mill the head 30 thousandths and you only had a half a turn, now you might have a full turn. That's still well within the safe range. So that's the thing. Sometimes you need to change push rod length, and sometimes you don't, because if you keep it within that safe range, you're okay. So the things that will affect whether or not you need to change the push rod, if you mill the head, definitely yes. If you somehow change the rocker pedestal position or shim it, obviously you would need to do that. Sometimes when you change rockers themselves, you need to change the push rod length. Not a lot of rocker changes in LS. At least I don't recommend them on guys putting roller rockers and stuff on. On some applications, it's okay, but not for the average guy. You should put a camshaft in and not rockers. If you change the camshaft and it changes the base circle, then you need to change the push rod. If you change the cylinder head, not just if we mill a stock head, but if you change from one head to another head, what happens is basically the distance from the deck of the head to where they've put that, you know, sometimes they have like a dowel pinned rocker stand. So the distance between where that rocker bolts to the stand, where the little cup is, to the deck of the cylinder head, that distance has changed on some aftermarket heads. A trick flow, for instance, a trick flow LS head, and probably the airflow research head, maybe some of the other aftermarket heads are like that too, but that distance has changed. So it necessitates normally in these cases a longer push rod, because now it has more distance there and you have to take that up with push rod length. So the push rod length needs to be longer. And again, these are all things that I've shown you in the video, that it's fairly easy to measure push rod length. So you can do that fairly easily. So if you change the cylinder head, that can also change it. You can, if you change the thickness of the head gasket, but in most cases, when we're talking about changing head gasket thicknesses on LSs, the normal range is like 40 to 50 or 55 thousandths. So that's a change of 10 thousandths or 15 thousandths, let's say. Again, that's usually still well within the sweet spot of the adjustability range that you have for a standard travel lifter. And so you would only need to change that if you have a head gasket situation where you have decreased or increased the head gasket. But as we said, where you were right near the edge of adjustability. Did that 10 thousandths or 15 thousandths take you out now? Did it make it so that, okay, now there is lash? Or now I've gone to too many turns of preload and now it will hang the valve open? Only if you're at the very outer edges of the adjustability range would that 10 thousandths usually make a difference. Normally when we change head gaskets to a different thickness, because we're trying to, for instance, go from a 53 to a 41 gasket, because we're trying to change compression and add a little bit of power, normally we don't change push rod lengths. The question might be, is there an optimum push rod length? Well, there definitely is, and there definitely would be, more so for short travel lifters, because short travel lifters don't have that same range of adjustment. A short travel lifter has anywhere between 15 and let's say 30 thousandths adjustment, which is not very much. So what happens is you have to be spot on your push rod length. And on some of these applications, I've seen where guys need to even run custom different length push rods if they haven't done everything exactly right. If the valve tips are not exactly all at the same height, and the rocker pads are not exactly at the same height, then you can have situations where you need, or the lifter cups are not exactly the same depth. All of that stuff could come into play and necessitate the need for, especially with the short travel lifters, because you have to be spot on, because too much and it will bind up, and not enough and you have lash. So you just have less range of adjustability on a short travel lifter. So you have to be spot on your push rod length for short travel lifters. So you can see there's a lot of stuff going on. So in that case, an optimum length push rod is definitely a necessity for race applications. So the other thing is, well, what about for standard travel lifters? Is a longer push rod better than a shorter push rod on your normal run-of-the-mill junkyard LS that you're putting a cam in and putting a turbo on or whatever? Yes and no. I like having the big range of adjustability. I like putting push rods in there. I like being able to turn it. Oh yeah, that had a full turn. That's fine. Call it good and go. This is a big thing, little thing. I've done push rod tests where we've changed the push rod length. And what happens is, when we go to a longer push rod and we start going near the end of, like, let's say we go from a half a turn to a full turn to a turn and a half. And now we're flirting with the danger zone of hanging the valve open because of the push rod length. So when you do that, what you've done effectively is you've made your standard travel lifter a short travel lifter. And the benefit to that is that when you go from a standard travel lifter and you've compressed the standard travel lifter down, what you've gotten rid of is a whole bunch of aerated oil, because the crankshaft and stuff beats up all the oil, and it's not like a nice consistent liquid. It has air in it. And when you have aerated oil in the lifter is not as precise. And so what happens is you don't have the same amount of lift and duration on the camshaft working all the time. That's part of what a short travel lifter does. And so by adding push rod length, you do that. So what happens is what ends up happening is you've made your cam more aggressive, or you've made it, you're actually using the real valve events on that camshaft. When you have an aerated lifter, you're not. You're varying that. So it softens the cam up. What that does normally, though, or at least it did in the test that I've run, because I've done this a couple of times now, what it normally does is it tends to add, when you go to a longer push rod, it adds power at the top, but it also can lose power down low. And this is pretty typical of when you make put a bigger camshaft in, if you think about it in that way. And but again, we're talking about a little bit of a change, a few horsepower, maybe 3 or 4 or something like that, I think, in the test that he did. So for me, I don't search for that amount, especially on a turbo LS. On an NA one that you were trying to get everything out of, but if you were trying to get everything out of and you're building a naturally aspirated LS and you're trying to make lots of power, you would be using a short travel lifter anyway. So this would be, you've already fixed that problem. And again, on a turbo LS, look for big, you just turn the boost up, just add another half pound or whatever, and you're going to be, a pound of boost might be 5 or 10 times that amount of power gain. And you're looking for something, again, this is not where I go looking for power, but that's usually what happens on optimum pushrod lengths. The other thing that happens is, and since we're talking about pushrods, is, you can get into discussions on pushrod deflection. So do I need a stronger pushrod? I see guys using 3/8 push rods and custom push rod wall thicknesses and things on some of these race applications. And maybe where guys are running these things to 8,000 and beyond, that this becomes an issue. In my testing in realistic ranges, meaning below 8,000 RPM, we've tested 80 and 105 wall thickness push rods and saw no change in power. I think the guys from Brian Tooley have done testing on push rod thickness on the Spintron, and I would like to get that data from them to see if there is more or less deflection. Again, in the normal range of motors that we're talking about building here, it's I don't think it's going to be very much. There is always going to be deflection in the system in a dynamic state. So even if you don't have any deflection in a stationary state, like when you're just rotating the motor over, you'll have some, and it's interesting to see. And especially on stuff that's really high spring rate, solid roller stuff, you'll have deflection and stuff. It will move. The rocker will deflect. The stud will deflect. The push rod will bend, actually. And in a dynamic state, it's even more so. So this is why when we talk about piston to valve clearance, that we're measuring piston to valve clearance in a static situation. So we're putting a light checker spring on, and we're spinning the thing around. We're figuring out how close the valve is to the piston, but it's not actually that while it's running. It's actually a good bit more than that, because the push rod has bent and the rocker has deflected. And when all of that happens, it adds piston to valve clearance, because now it takes away lift, it takes away duration, it takes away all of the good things that make power. And so that's why guys, when they're running very high RPM stuff, they have, solidly mounted shaft rockers and all that to get rid of, or to minimize that deflection. And also why, when they're designing these things, not just making it bigger and beefier, but a lot of work goes into like finite element analysis and frequencies to make the thing work in the RPM range that it's designed to work at. It's really cool stuff, but it takes a lot of work. So we gotta start a poll here, though. I'm curious, have you ever broken a push rod in your motor? That will be our poll for today. I don't think I've broken a push rod while the motors run. I I'd have to look back in some of our data and see if that's actually happened. I've had broken push rods on the motors that I like, this 4.8 that I have. That one had broken push rods, or they weren't broken, they were bent. One of them was missing, so that we don't know what happened to that one. But they were bent, but not like destroyed, not like snapped in half. And that's what normally happens, is they'll bend and deflect and then be out of the way, and then the rocker's not hopefully hitting it anymore. But we'll see if guys have had any damage like that. But that's our discussion on the need to change push rod length and when we need to do that in some of the instances, and then also the range of adjustability. Remember, if you're within the range of adjustability on an LS, it's going to work. It's going to start up, it's going to run, and you're going to be happy with it. As you get closer to, the fewer turns that you put in it in preload, maybe the more likely you are to have valve train noise. Although I don't think in a lot of these cases, when guys have these lifter ticks and things like that, I don't think that that's a lash situation. I don't think that that's what's happening. I think there's something else going on that's not that, because once you have a half a turn or so in there, because like, look at all the small block Fords and Chevys and big blocks and all these things that we've run for years with a half turn preload, and they don't make valve train noise other than the noise that you would hear of the rockers moving and stuff. Sean, I did see your dyno sheet. I responded to that. Yep, that's good power. I didn't watch the video of the pull, though. I'll have to watch the video. Admiral, what's up? Burns is in the house. Turbo Sentra, LSX, what's going on? Ford FE, there you go. I have been there while they've run a few of those. I did a intake swap with Robert Pond, putting a stack injection on a 482-inch aluminum FE motor, if I remember right. It made good power. It had the aluminum heads, aluminum block. It was going in some Cobra, and they put that stack EFI injection on it, and they had a dual plane on it, and then took that off and put the stack injection. It made good power. Mopar shafts. There are kits to set the shaft height and distance from the valve tip, then do the push rod. Use the half lift method or equal up and down for mid. Okay. Original pinch nuts on my 327. I would have to adjust them like once a week. I know, James, when I did the special agent, when I did all of those, the 302 and the 327 and the 350 and then the 350 and then all of those, we ended up just putting, and when we did the solid cam versions and the hydraulic cam versions, I just put poly locks on them so that we didn't have to, because we had new pinch nuts that we bought for all of them. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going through all this dyno testing and having these things back off and then wonder why it's not making good power, or was that a good run or all that. So we ended up just putting poly locks on everything, and then we never had to worry about it. It was awesome after that. Sean, how much horsepower would a 5.7 LS1 with an exhaust and dyno tune make? Is it, Ray, is your 5.7 all stock? Too short and you get too much side thrust, and too long and the rocker pad comes off the side of the valve. Lunchtime in Florida. I wish I was in Florida hunting pythons. Saw lifter adjustment is all I have to deal with, but I'd rather deal with the pinch nut on the rockers. But yours is yours is an overhead cam motor, right? The SRT4. 323 horsepower at the tire, 2001 LS1 Camaro, full exhaust, factory LS6 intake manifold. Go for the thinnest stripe possible where the stripe is on the valve tip. Does not matter unless off the edge. Where the stripe is on the valve tip doesn't matter. I don't agree with that. I think it should be centered on the tip. If it's out toward the edge of the valve, then the push rod's too long. If it's toward the inner edge, then the push rod's too short. And when the push rod length is right and the rocker geometry is right, the sweep should be in the middle of the tip. On an adjustable rocker, but not on, it doesn't work that way on an LS though. Put a bigger turbo on it. Quit worry about the little odds and ends. Yeah. Getaway, what's up? Thankfully, sun's out. It's not going to be nice for a little bit today. 40, 49 to 50. That's boost weather, right? I would only adjust head gasket thickness to set up a good quench height. Big things over little things. Big things are greater than little things. That's right. Depends on how much copper gasket spray you use. Just you lay that on there pretty thick, then, right? It's like about 6 or 8 layers of it. Richard, have you ever seen stock gap on piston rings as high as 26 on the top ring and 30 on the second? The 3800 actually had about 30 on the second ring, but it was only 22 on the top ring. I haven't seen that ever on an LS from any motor that I've taken apart on the wreck yard. It seems as pushrod discussions applies to bolt down rockers and not stud mounted rockers. Well, the cylinder head, the changes in the cylinder head or milling, those apply to adjustable rockers. Rocker ratio applies to adjustable rockers. I wish dry sumps were a standard thing. It would be nice to just have that cured. I wish dry sumps were a standard thing on big block Chevys. Optimizing pushrod length, it sounds like a lot of work for tiny gains. But what about just making them lighter with the effect of power at all? Actually, Sean, people go the other way on pushrods. They generally make them heavier. They make them bigger diameter and thicker wall. Sean, gives you what gives you piston to valve clearance? Setting fulcrum height on both stud and shaft helps with stability and longevity. Cam designer designed that way. Setting too low gives you more top acceleration and loft. Yeah, bent counts. Bending the push rods is the same thing. The push rod from my messed up valve from my L7 looked pretty tore up by the end. Yeah. Yeah, that counts. Any I should have said damage the push rod because most people probably don't break them. A broken one is a lot. I replaced a few push rods on a 455 recently, was run hot, put away with bad timing gears, plunged oil sump, and once I got the head off, the valve guides were knurled. Uh-oh. Oh, Sean, you okay? You didn't run it on E85. You only ran your motor on 93. Okay. There's probably, I don't remember what the compression was on that thing, but there's probably some more, maybe if it's high compression deal to run it on E85. And how much timing did you guys run on 93? Yeah, grooves. The 90-degree angle at half full lift is Brule, I think, does that too. I bet a push rod, not for me. I'm still using it because I like to live dangerously. I remember Brule telling me the story about, I don't remember if it was a pro stock motor or if it was a top fuel motor, but they kept seeing indications on the push rod where it was hitting the head or was hitting the hole in the head. This was definitely a big block. And so it was rubbing against the hole in the head. So they kept making the hole bigger in the head, and it kept doing it. Finally, the push rod just bent. And they're like, oh, that's what's happening. We don't care that the push rod's hitting the hole. We care that the hole is stabilizing the push rod. So they just went back and let the push rod rub on the hole. My valve train is rather noisy, and it seems like the sheet metal intake just makes it so loud. This is just the downfall of a dual valve spring and the intake, or can this be mitigated? Your sheet metal intake is always going to be loud. And if you have, especially if you have one of the thin ones, if you watch what it's doing, if you watch the frequency that thing is vibrating at, I'm surprised that the welds don't break on those. Specialty. So you put new gears, oil pump, cleaned up the guides, good oil pressure. Now the radiator runs good. Push rods were so bent, but the valves didn't move. So where does the force go? Yeah. Lately, I've been spoiled on double overhead cam motors. No push rods to worry about. That's true. And actually, on the Honda stuff, once we set the lash one time, it lasts for a long time. When we were road racing them, and even when I was doing Motorola Cup, even in really long endurance stuff, the valve lash didn't change. What I do when I'm doing JM, when I'm doing big blocks on solid cams, is I look at the rocker relative to the valve and the push rod, and a lot of times we'll do a adjustable push rod, and then we'll get an idea of where we should be. And then I like doing it with the lash, and then I do a marker on the tip, and then we make it so that the rocker pattern, so the tip pattern, is in the center of the valve. Then that gives me a pretty good idea on push rod length. And that's how I adjust it for big blocks. But I like doing it not just with a checker spring. I like doing it with the actual valve spring. Milled my head 30. Can I get away with a thinner head gasket? Roger, the thing that you need to be concerned with is how far are your pistons coming out of the hole? How close are the pistons getting to the cylinder head, especially on a thinner head gasket? And then also, what is your piston to valve clearance? Because you've just changed it by the amount of milling the head. As long as your valve, well, the valve angle, I'd have to look at the valve angle and the head and see if the valve drop is exactly the same. But let's say that go ahead. Go. Go lay down. But I would be worried about the change in piston to valve clearance there. Has anyone ever bent a hardened push rod? You need to check it in any case, either with thicker gaskets, but there are trade-offs when you're going after quench. I found bent push rods in other engines, but not in any of mine. Yeah, I found them in wrecking yards. It takes big power, something misaligned. Usually if you bend a hardened push rod, it's because there was interference somewhere, and you didn't do that from power, with the exception of top fuel cars did that when they were playing with the valve events. They would get to a point where they can't open the exhaust valve anymore. It's the maximum piston to valve clearance on a stock LQ4, looking to fit a 239, 244, 111 plus 2. I have this set of ported 243 heads, and I know it will be close. That's close enough where you're going to need to measure it. I've used 1/2-inch 83 wall from Manton push rods with lash lock caps. You've used that on LS motors? When we ran the 8,000 RPM stuff, and I've run near 8,000 with, no, those weren't stock push rods, but they were hardened. All the 8,000 RPM stuff I've run has all been 5/16 push rods. Compression's 11.5. Okay, pulled out the laptop to see what we landed on compression. Looks. Oh, to see what you looked at on timing. You have 23 degrees in it. You're definitely a ways away from optimum timing in that. So you'll on E85, you're going to make a good bit more power. Dreadnought, thank you for coming. Yeah, puppy dog cameo. Yeah, that was Bruno. He's the more adventurous one. So Brady was sitting out there looking in, like going, dude, you go in and see if it's okay, and then I'll come in later. And mock with a checker, but final assembly we use the actual spring as well. Yeah. Yeah, I get a rough idea with an adjustable push rod. Comp has some, the guys at West Tech have some of the Comp spinny adjustable push rods, and that makes that makes life easy so that we can get an idea and go, hey, look. And then a lot of times we have a whole bunch of push rods there. So if we get something that's close, hey, look, we needed a 8500 and we have an 8550 or an 8450. We put that in there and see where it is, and then go, okay, yeah, either this will work for the dyno test because it's close enough for who it is, or we order push rods and then get some and then run them. I missed the live air distribution. Have you noticed a particular intake on a specific intake always has a specific lean cylinder? Example, 5.3 LS truck intake always has cylinder X lean. I haven't seen that universally because I haven't done 802s on enough different intakes on enough different motors to say, look, this one is always lean. We noticed on the airfield distribution on the blower mounted on the high ram that cylinder 1 seemed to be lean, but not the others that were directly under the blower. I have 53 thousandths gap on your rings when I took my motor apart. That's more than I've seen. That might be the most. That's pretty good. On a 5.3, is there a more streetable turbo? I don't know what you mean by streetable. A turbo, any turbo size is very streetable. So the turbo, when you're just driving around at part throttle, and that's my definition of streetability, is that does it start up? Does it idle? Does it drive around easy at part throttle? Can I go through a drive-through without the thing clattering and making noise and smoking and stuff? And does it cruise on the freeway nice? That's my idea of streetability. And any turbo does that because the turbo is not coming into play. So now tell me what you want the turbo to do in addition to that. So like, what is your additional definition of streetability? I'm a little surprised carbon fiber hasn't been used for push rods. It's definitely been tried, but it hasn't worked very well. The survey is whited out. Move your cursor around to see if the survey comes back. Right now it's at 50-50. Have you ever broken a push rod in your motor? So we have some that have and some that haven't. Tried carbon fiber. Yeah, they tried that at West Tech too. They tried carbon fiber valves too. I think that might have been Vizard that did that. They tried carbon fiber valves and those immediately blew out the exhaust. Also, Richard, when I do go to nitrous, I'll follow some advice and give you previously sell my fast and get an MSD. The MSD should make more power, but also you need to you need to have 29 degrees of timing in that thing and E85. I love and hate your channel because of you. I get that a lot. Mostly the hate side. Those are the people I get the comments from. We get, there's lots of people that watch it, I'm sure, that like it, but I've decided to LS swap an RX-8. There goes my time and money for the next year or so. Yeah, that happens. The RX-8 should be good with an LS. And somebody else has one here that has an RX-8 with a LS, and I think it's a 4.8 liter, or maybe his is an RX-7 with a 4.8 liter, and he's calling it an RX-8 maybe. Either way, it's still good. Plus, the RX-8 is with those smaller, doesn't have like the small rear doors on it too, so that makes it the sedan or station wagon of the RX-7 family. So our poll is going up now, 54% or no. Definitely with an RX-8, get something aluminum. Yeah, like an L33 or LC9 or LH6 or any of those aluminum 5.3s would be good. What is it? Does anybody know what a rotary weighs? What's the weight on a rotary compared to like an aluminum V8? They look like they're not very heavy, but it'd be cool to see an M90 on an LV3. Not sure if there's an appropriate intake manifold. There isn't a manifold made for it, but you could certainly make one for it. Sodium filled valves are for cooling. Yeah, Burns, that's right. If the factory OEM level guys can't get carbon fiber to work in the intake man or in the engine, then it's probably because it can't work. Apprentice says the RX-8 is real light, like 250 pounds. The older ones are heavier. 250 pounds. So that's lighter than even a composite intake, aluminum head, aluminum block V8 is going to be. That's going to be a lot heavier than that. The new LS stuff they showcased at the LA Auto Show looks really good. I touched one of the half cuts and a spark plug tube fell off. I'm surprised. Usually show stuff is at least glued together because people want to come by and take stuff. It's ridiculous. Even people have a table full of free stuff. They want to take stuff off the show. Look, I got this from the auto show. You're just a criminal. A criminal. Dave, I didn't see an email from you. Let me see. I'll click over. I'm showing some new ones. I don't see an email from you, Dave. I'll see if I have any. See if I have any spam. Let's see. Wow, I'm taking a look at my spam. I got a lot of stuff in my spam. Lots of collaboration opportunities. Ooh, job opportunity. Amazon is hiring. Collaboration. Look, I have unclaimed funds. I have package notifications. Video editing proposals. Premium membership. Oh, I like all this stuff. I need to go to my spam folder more often. There's lots of good stuff. And built parts to that rotor. You could shave them down to 150 pounds. Shift knobs disappear. Yeah, definitely that kind of stuff. Racer D. It's Killer B16 at AOL. It's KILLERBE, the number 1, the number 6 at AOL. Pole vault effect when pushrod straighten out affects loft. Yeah, they used to do that on in fact they used to design frequencies of the pushrod to do exactly that on lift rule camshafts in NASCAR. So lofting was a thing. It'll take 29 E85. I wonder if it's something wrong. Tripping the knock sensors past 23 seems like a large difference. Jumping from 93 to E85. No, E85 you can easily run that much more timing because it has a cooling effect and it has more octane. Richard sends all my emails to spam because I try to get him to start an OF with a motor oil feet picture. What's an oil feet? An OnlyFans? Pouring Do I get to pour motor oil on my feet? Because that would be awesome. But only synthetic. Or bio seaweed oil. I need to do some video editing. I did a lot. How do you feel about mounting the turbo on the long tube header, or should I build a new short header? Are you putting this motor in something? If you're not putting it in something, just run the long tube header. It doesn't matter. Just pay us a small fee to claim your package. Exactly. All those things are like that. Or give us your account number or whatever other kind of information they're trying to get. Do you think you'll revisit the 5.9 Magnum? Yeah, I have lots more testing I want to do. Easy enough to intentionally loft a valve. Yep. Much harder to bring it back down on a soft. That's why they did it, at least according to the reading that I did on back when they had qualifying motors for Cup. That's why they did it on qualifying motors, because they knew that it was not a long-term thing. Push rods don't work the best for harmonic balancer pullers. That's what we use on our puller tool, and we have bent them before, though. The cool one, though, that we have, or the Westech the Westech has, is the hydraulic one. It's pneumatic, but it's it's pulsing a hydraulic system, and so I think the gauge goes up to 10,000 psi. We don't let it go up that high, because then we figure, hey, there's a problem with it, or we'll start tapping the damper with a mallet to try to break it free. But it just pulls them off and pushes them on. The problem is it's got to be centered when you go to push it on, because it'll push it on and it'll take off pieces of crankshaft and stuff. It's not good. Trying to get work done, slack off as much as possible. I definitely been to push rod using it to pull a balancer. Yeah, you definitely have to have hardened push rods for that. It makes me wonder what in those tools, because we have the GM balancer, balancer or damper removal tool, and they are push rods in that, but I wonder how thick they are. Did any of the Harley Davidson F-150s come with a Predator motor? Does anybody know? I'm surprised Admiral doesn't chime in there. A friend once impacted a balancer onto his 3800. He forged a new keyway into the balancer. Uh-oh. Yeah, it will peel back stuff. It scuffs the balancer. It's not good. Forget about it. Should run an engine with some balancer puller push rods. I need to see what length they are. Do I need a dart block? I'm doing desert racing, looking for 500 to 600 horsepower. What engine family is this? Admiral, didn't you see somebody had a modular Ford question? You didn't answer Burns' question on the Harley Davidson F-150 that come with a Predator motor? Push rods break because they're bad. All right. So if we just set them on the ground, then they're bad. I would definitely tear up stuff with a hydraulic puller. Yeah, it will do the job. I guess you get the balancer off and find the snout still in the balancer. Yep. I'm doing, and it's cool because it has a whole bunch of I'm sure that I don't know if they're 300M, but they're some kind of hardened shafts that they have with different threads on them, so that the shaft screws into different crankshafts. So they have big block ones and small block ones and LS ones and Hemi ones and stuff. And then this whole like plunger assembly slides on, and you just put a nut on the back of it and it draws it out. Or if you flip it around, pushes it in. It's pretty cool. Kevin, I'm going flex, then I'm going turbo, then I'm going to compound. There you go. All that's good stuff. Definitely get an MLS to replace it when you redo it. I'm kind of surprised they're not known for head gasket issues. I suspect the issue I've had is due to the rebuild done without checking push rod length. I have a burn valve. Ron's a small block Chevy. What's stroke 350 or 434 or 427? I don't know. What are guys using for? Is that like a desert truck or something? I think that the ones that guys like, who is it, Dugan's, I think that they've switched over to big blocks. But I think when they were doing small blocks, they were doing 400 plus inch deals with the all pro heads and stuff. But for 500 or 600 horsepower, you don't need that. Chad, so how much power are you wanting to make with the turbo 5.3? And what are you doing with other things that will affect whether it's laggy or not? Are you putting a big camshaft in it? Are you keeping the truck manifold? So what are you doing there? A GT45 is not bad on a 5.3, but if you want to go something smaller, then you can. Richard, how rough a surface have you gotten away with when using an MLS gasket? I think probably the rough, I don't know what the RA number is because we didn't measure it, but I think probably the roughest surface stuff that we've had is something where we've reused, like put a new MLS head gasket back on like a used surface from the wrecking yard. I don't know what that RA is at, but it can't be good. If you regrind the cam, yeah, if normally when they regrind camshafts, they make the base circle smaller. So then you would need a different push rod. Grooves is recommending a BorgWarner S366. That would be a good choice. Measure the surface roughness by whatever grit sandpaper I use on it. That's a good way. It's 80 or 20. Do you have a recommendation on how to clean off old head gasket material? I normally use a razor blade. That's why I call it the razor blade rebuild. What have you done for noisy LS7 lifters? I haven't done anything for them because I haven't had that happen to me, actually. Let it ride. Kind of push rod question. I have a 408 stroker. Was looking at a 232, 240 cam. Going to boost it with stock style lifters and 5/16 80 wall push rods and a 660 BTR. The 660 springs will work. You don't need that much spring for that camshaft. Do they have something smaller than that? That's just a lot of spring away from coil bind. And the closer you are to coil bind, the better it will work. I mean, those will work fine for probably what you're doing. John, what kind of streaks are you seeing on that dipstick? Is it from water? Because water and oil don't mix. Running 7.4 push rods, 1540 oil. They are noisy. You're running 1540 oil? Is this on an LS? I don't know. 84s. I don't know how much lifter preload you have with a 7/400 push rod on that. Do you know how much lifter preload you already have? Because if you already have a half or a full turn of preload, a longer push rod is probably not going to do anything for noise because it's probably not valve train lash. No oil in the coolant. It's not full milkshake. Yeah, you never go full milkshake, but it has a streakiness. It does look like water. Was told by my machine shop I need at least 450 pounds of open spring pressure for boost. Well, considering the fact that we've run boost on stock springs, on stock cams, that's probably not the case. Just spray tack 120 grit on a built piece of aluminum is long enough and seems to work fine on heads and blocks. Yeah, I've seen people. We've done that on a Honda one. In fact, I did that. I block sanded a high spot on a Honda D series, and then we put it back together, and it worked fine. Do you have a preferred tool for valve spring installation? I used a few of them. The ones that Westech has, they have a couple of different ones, but basically they work the same. They, you have a stand that bolts down, and then you have something that looks like has an H pattern on it, and then you screw the bolt down, and it pushes both springs down, and we just put air in the bore. If we're doing it with the head on the motor, if we're doing it with the head off of the motor, we have the clamping spring compressor deals that we change the springs with off of the motor. But either one of them works. And the ones that press both the valves down with the head still on, that's really fast. All you have to do is pry up if it still has the stock seals and stuff on it and spring cups, then you just take those off and put new seals and stuff on. Your milkshake brings all the cars to the yard. That's right. Should we check our push rods on stock LS? No. If it's all stock, you don't have to worry about it. The OEMs did that for you already. Started with 1030, and then 540, then 1540, and they're still noisy. In a drift application with a 5.3, what do you recommend for cam specs? I don't have a recommendation on that. Brian Tooley Racing has some drift cams, and I don't understand necessarily why a drift cam would be better. Maybe they soften the ramp rates on them or something because guys are bouncing off the rev limiters. I honestly don't know. 67,000 is preload. That should be more than enough. There should be no lash with that much. Stock springs and LS7 lifters. I've never broken a push rod, but I've bent them. Yep, that's kind of what we're talking about. I should have put bent in there. Had the ball ends mushroom on me. If you look at they football to the factory push rods. I've seen a lot of those from stuff that's in the wrecking yard. When you take them apart and you take off of the stock rockers, sometimes the push rods, because of lack of oiling and maintenance on these things, and lots of miles, that the push rod tips are the balls have worn basically the outer edges of it, and so now it's kind of shaped like a football. And then the underside, the cup in the rocker, will be very shiny because it's worn a lot. I usually do the gaskets with a razor blade, and then I use a shop vac I hold the shop vac while I'm doing the work, and just so that it gets most of it out, and then we blow everything out and, try to clean it as best we can. Honestly, it's a wrecking yard motor. It has way more bad stuff in it than I would be putting in it from doing that. T-Fave, yeah, happy to help, man. Richard, I want to put a 76 millimeter turbo on a 6.2 with 4-digit heads. How many pounds can I put in it, taking into account that the engine is stock? That's a loaded question because it's going to depend more on your tune. I don't know what 76 millimeter turbo you have. 76 millimeter turbos that are available out there vary from a 700 horsepower turbo to a, 1,400 horsepower turbo. So depending on which one of those you have is going to determine how much boost you run. And then what are you starting out with? Is it all stock? Does it have head studs on it? Does it have good gaskets in it? Have you put ring gap in it? What fueler are you going to use? Is it intercooled? My hand's doing the same thing. Who's going to do the tuning? You know, you're running E85, all that. It's going to depend. Richard, have you ever set the preload at the bottom of the lifter, you mean? And then adjust a quarter turn out. So you want to, I remember Brule talking to me about that, about bottoming out the lifter, but I've never tried that. I've never tried that on a hydraulic one. And do you do that on a standard travel lifter so that you only have basically a quarter of a turn of movement of the plunger? And do you still uncover where the transfer holes are for the oil? Off topic, I'm going to use an Amazon oil pan. I believe it's a 5-quart. Does anyone know if I can use the same dipstick that came on this 5.3 truck motor? I don't know. I don't know what the depth of that pan is compared to a stock one. You'd have to actually take both the pans off, fill them with water, and put the dipstick in and see where the measurement is. 17, a blue head gasket, and end up having to rebuild the engine. How big or bad of a scratch can I put on a block deck before it doesn't seal? That's a test. Probably more than you think, especially it depends on where the scratch is. Does the scratch overlap the head gasket sealing for combustion, or does it just overlap for water? One of those has more pressure than the other, so it's going to be more problematic. And then can you fill it with the spray copper gasket stuff? Can you fill it with, and depending on where it is, if it's not in the combustion area, that could be bad. I mean, if it is in the combustion area, that could be bad. If it's not, then you usually can fill that with a stock style head gasket. A stock style head gasket will deform enough to fill that. How much compression can I run with 7 pounds of boost on a Ford's built Pontiac? That shouldn't be your question. The question is, how much power can I make on 7 pounds with a Pontiac 400? So the question would be answered by how much power are you starting with? Your compression question is a function of octane. How much octane are you running? And you don't need to run a lot of static compression with 7 pounds of boost. That's the nice thing about having 7 pounds of boost is that, and if you think you're missing out because you ran 9-to-1 instead of 10-to-1, that's less than half a pound of boost. So your compression is easily adjusted with boost. How do you recommend cleaning out head bolt holes on the block? It's a Junkyard 5.3. I'm going to reinstall heads this weekend. We tip the block upside down. I usually put the long nozzle on brake clean stuff and spray it out. And then I blow it out with air, and we have a long nozzle that goes all the way in and blows all of it out. And then we just chase the threads, and then I blow it out again, and then we're usually good. Or on junkyard motors, I don't do any of that, and we just put the bolts in. We just make sure that there's no oil in there, because you just don't want to hydrolock the bottom of the hole, and then it could break the block down there. Yes, it just makes the stock lifter a short travel lifter. Yeah, that's what doing the push rod lengthening does. My LS project would rev to over 7,000 on the dyno with no problem. Yeah, a stock one will do that. We do that even with long travel lifters. But I've never tried that method, though. You can cut a slot on an old bolt and use it like a tap. Yeah, I've seen guys do that. I want to make big horsepower on a 5.3 NA, but still daily drive it. What do you recommend? I recommend that if you want to make a lot of power with it and daily drive it, your best option is to turbocharge it, because you can make way more power and still drive it and have it still be drivable. It'll have a mild cam in it, but on an NA build, you're going to get it into the trade-off zone. It won't be, if it makes a lot of power as a 5.3 NA, it's not going to be a good daily driver. And then so you're going to have some compromise of that. What's the worst car you've ever owned? Mine was a 95 Turbo Eclipse. probably the 72 911T that I had, because I bought it, and as I was driving it home, it threw a rod. I like to use a cutoff wheel to grind a couple of flutes under the side of a used bolt. Yep. We have a chase, so we just use that. And like I said, me chasing those threads is the exception and not the rule. The car didn't make the round the block warranty. No, I'm guilty as everybody else. It's just that I wanted a 911, and this was in my price range, and was in my price. This was way back, and this was in my price range, because the guy knew that it was broken. so I was like, oh, it's probably fine. and only after it broke did I find out how expensive it is to put together another Porsche motor. Even the low man on the totem pole 911T motor. Chad, 600 horsepower LS3 intake, cathedral port adapters, stockish cam. I'm sure that should be stockist, not shockist. So what are you, Chad? I didn't read what you were talking about up here. The last thing I saw from you is what's the worst cam. But are you answering somebody's question about putting that on a 5.3? Because a LS3 intake with adapters on a 5.3 is a terrible idea. The Porsche Playground is those with deep pockets. Yeah, that's look at Dan and his turbo thing. I'm sure that costs a lot to build that thing. An LS7 intake is also not a good idea on an LS3. I mean, on a 5.3. Only a cathedral port intake is a good idea on a 5.3. Blue collar, what's up? Have you ever used BTR 630 springs? If so, how high would you recommend revving them? The RPM potential is not going to be based on the spring. That's going to be based on everything else in the motor. Not everything, but where do you want this thing to even make power? How much camshaft do you have in it? What intake manifold do you have? What, all of these, how much head flow do you have? You should be worried not about our maximum RPM of the spring. If you have light valves on it and you have the right camshaft in it, that thing should go to 9,000 with those springs in it. Valve adjustment on an air-cooled Porsche is $20,000. Is that a dealership price or something? Because I would just buy another motor that has the valves adjusted on it. Dan has to have a lot into it, but it's cool. They are cool. A turbo Porsche, any turbo Porsche is amazing. I was wondering if you had talked to anyone that might have the same issue with me as one lifter gushing out oil out like mine was doing. We told you what it is. It's got to be a clearance issue. Either the band for the lifter is coming uncovered, or the bore size relative to the lifter size is incorrect. $13.2 at 103. Nice, blue collar. Third-party shop price. Have you ever tested horsepower and valve seat angle on the dyno? So you want to change the valve job basically on a set of cylinder heads and run it on the dyno? I haven't ever done that. Vern, you need to measure it. If you have the motor apart, just measure the OD of the lifter body, and then measure the ID of the bore and see what they are. and measure the other ones in comparison. In fact, you could do that if you said that you've already tried swapping lifters and we're assuming that the lifter body is consistent. Just measure the two bores that are right next to each other. Is one of them 5 or 10 thousandths bigger than the other one? If it is, then you're just getting oil blow by on that. If they're the same, then we have some head scratching to do. I'm getting there. Still needs a converter swap. 60 foot time. Do you want a 500 wheel horsepower air cooled Porsche? Yeah, no. And that's the thing we were talking the other day about, and I got to get going, so we'll close out our poll. But we were talking about how free cars or free motors or whatever are never free, and that's a perfect example. If somebody gave me that 72 911T, all they've given me is debt. They haven't given me anything. Yeah, Burns is right. And Brandon, this is to your question on testing valve jobs, is that changing valve jobs may improve lift at one part of the lift range and hurt it at other parts of the lift range. And it may benefit one kind of header more than the other because of the scavenging effect at low lift and different camshafts and different intake manifolds. And so if we did that test, it would really be specific to the kind of thing that we're testing it on. I wanted to ask somebody, let's see, Ty, I wanted to find out what your question was. Oh, 630 springs. Your BTR Red Hot cam at a 5.3 is, you're not going to have to worry about the RPM potential of those springs with that camshaft. And especially if you have stock heads and a stock intake manifold on it, you'll be able to rev it higher than you'll be making power. I've already done a Gen 3 Hemi. So we've done that on a big bang one. Although I think there's probably more there. Not going to do a big bang on a 6.2 Ford because I never even have done any testing on it. A V10 Ford I'd like to do more testing on. All 16 lifter holes were all the same. The lifters were 875 body. Did you actually measure all the lifter holes and measure all the lifters? We did a Gen 3 Hemi. It made over 1,000 horsepower. There's always more. And on that note, it is time to go, but I'll see you guys all later. Bam, bam, bam.